Imagine hiring like the most expensive, shadowy hitman in the ancient world.
Yeah, and then watching him just hand his weapon to your worst enemy.
Exactly, just handing it over and offering them a glowing endorsement instead.
It is such a wild scenario.
It really is. Today, we are plunging into a 3,000-year-old text about a forced blessing that completely backfires. But before we unpack the story of this mysterious seer named Balaam, we want to start by offering a blessing of our own over you for your day and the week ahead.
Absolutely.
So whatever you are facing right now, may your path be clear and may you find strength and peace.
I mean, that is just the perfect framing for where we are heading today in this deep dive.
Yeah, it really sets the stage. We're going to be looking closely at Numbers chapter 24, and our mission today relies heavily on detailed notes from two incredible sources, the Holman Study Bible and the NWA Study Bible.
Right, and both of these sources really help us dig into the core of this text because it forces us to look at a very uncomfortable reality, which, well, it's the massive, chilling difference between simply having access to the truth and actually, allowing that truth to transform how you live.
Oh, that is a heavy distinction. But to really grasp the stakes here, you have to put yourself in the geopolitical tension of the ancient Near East.
Yeah, you have to imagine the pressure.
Right. So you have King Balak of Moab. He is looking out at the Israelites camped near his territory, and he is just terrified.
He feels completely outmatched militarily.
Totally outmatched.
Yeah.
So he does what a desperate Bronze Age king does. He tries to buy a supernatural outcome. He hires Balaam, this famous seer, to put a spiritual curse on the Israelites.
And it's crucial to understand that in this era, a curse wasn't just viewed as bad words.
Right, or like a psychological tactic.
Exactly. It was believed to be a kinetic, economic, and military weapon. Balak genuinely thinks he could just commodify the divine.
Like pay the right fee, do the right ritual, and boom, the gods will act as his personal artillery.
Which was basically the standard operating procedure for ancient religions.
Transactional, right?
Highly transactional. You feed the gods through sacrifices, you pay their earthly representatives, and they execute your political will. But as we enter chapter 24, that entire system just breaks down.
It completely falls apart.
Yeah. Balaam has been trying his usual methods to find a vulnerability in Israel's spiritual armor. He's been looking for omens.
And divination in that time, that usually involved what? Reading the entrails of animals?
Entrails, observing the flight patterns of birds, looking for specific astrological signs, all trying to manipulate the spiritual realm.
Right.
But suddenly, the text tells us, Balaam realizes that it pleases the Lord to bless Israel. So he simply stops. He abandons the parlor tricks.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because this is like a hacker who finally stops trying to brute force a password using dirty tricks, right?
Oh, I like that.
And instead, the system administrator just opens the source code right in front of him. He stops guessing because he can finally just look at the map.
The raw reality is just right there.
Right there. And I want to ask you, listening to this right now, what stands out to you when someone suddenly drops their gimmicks and just speaks raw truth? It changes the entire atmosphere.
What's fascinating here is how it changes his language. When his eyes are opened, the imagery Balaam uses completely transforms.
The Holman and NWA study notes both highlight this, right?
Yeah, they point out that he shifts into this beautiful Eden-like poetry. He looks down at the Israelite camps and compares their tents to stretching valleys, to gardens planted right by the river.
Just lush, vivid imagery.
He talks about aloe and cedar trees planted by the Lord. And crucially, he mentions water spilling from buckets and seeds growing in abundant waters.
Which, I mean, that sounds like a nice, peaceful poem to our modern ears. But in an arid desert environment, that's not just pretty imagery, is it?
Not at all.
That is a declaration of absolute dominance.
Precisely. Because in the Bronze Age Levant, water is survival. It is the foundation of agriculture, economics, military logistics, everything. So describing water constantly pouring from buckets, which implies an artificial, relentless irrigation and seeds in abundant waters, that's the ultimate symbol of unstoppable growth.
It's infinite wealth.
Exactly. Balaam is realizing that God's will to bless this people isn't some fragile thing that can be undone by a magic spell. It is an absolute overflowing reality. And he is entirely overwhelmed by it.
And because he's seeing this with open eyes, the prophecy doesn't stay in the garden for very long.
It takes a very sharp, aggressive turn.
The lush trees fade out, and Balaam begins describing Israel's God-given strength as being like a wild ox.
Yeah, some older translations actually use the word unicorn here.
Wait, really? A unicorn.
Yeah, but the historical context in the notes points to the aurochs. It was a massive, untamed, utterly unpredictable beast. It's raw power.
So not a sparkly horse.
Definitely not. The aurochs was a terrifying animal in the ancient world. You couldn't domesticate it. You couldn't harness it to a plow.
It just did whatever it wanted.
And it destroyed whatever stood in its way. So by using that metaphor, Balaam is telling King Balak that the force backing Israel cannot be managed or steered by human hands.
And he goes even further. He says Israel will devour hostile nations. They will break their bones and pierce them with arrows.
It's brutal.
Yeah. And then he uses the image of a lion resting. He says they will lie down like a fierce lion and asks, who dares to rouse him?
Which is the ancient equivalent of saying, let sleeping dogs lie.
Except the dog is an apex predator that will absolutely dismantle you if you poke it.
Exactly.
And then he delivers the final blow to his employer. He echoes the ancient promise God made to Abraham all the way back in Genesis 12:3. He looks at King Balak and basically drops the mic. He says, blessed are those who bless you, and cursed are those who curse you.
He is a stunning reversal. I mean, Balak paid a fortune to weaponize the spiritual realm against his enemies.
And instead, the weapon is pointed squarely back at his own chest.
The text tells us Balak furiously claps his hands together in anger. It's a gesture of supreme frustration and impotence.
Just losing his mind.
He is yelling at Balaam that he paid for a curse and got 3 distinct blessings instead.
But wait, I'm looking at the economics of this exchange, though. In his anger, Balak basically yells at Balaam, I was going to cover you with honors and make you rich, but the Lord has deprived you of wealth.
Right.
Isn't Balaam actually the loser here, walking away empty-handed?
Yeah.
He did the travel, he performed the initial rituals, he risked the wrath of a foreign king, and he gets nothing.
Well, from a purely materialistic standpoint, yes, he loses the immediate payout. But the NAA study notes provide a really profound insight into the underlying logic here.
Okay, what do they say?
They point out that demanding a curse on God's people, logically and inevitably, results in a curse falling on the one making the demand. The divine economy just doesn't work like human bribery.
Oh, wow.
Balaam, in this specific moment of open-eyed clarity, recognizes this. He answers Balak by stating that even if the king gave him a literal house full of silver and gold, he could not transgress the Lord's command.
He realizes that accepting Balak's wealth would mean aligning himself with a doomed enterprise.
Exactly. He sees that Balak's money is essentially counterfeit currency when measured against divine momentum.
You can't buy off a wild ox, and you certainly can't bribe the God who created it.
That realization completely shatters Balaam's immediate worldview. He understands that this localized border dispute isn't just about Moab and Israel.
It's way bigger.
It's about a much larger, unstoppable divine plan. And that realization is exactly why his vision suddenly breaks the boundaries of his own timeline.
Right, because Balak fires him and tells him to go back to his people. But Balaam refuses to leave quietly.
He has to get the last word.
He does. Before he goes, he pivots away from the immediate situation, the tents, the ox, the lion, and he delivers a fourth, completely unsolicited oracle.
And here's where it really shifts gears.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because it acts like a telescope pointed straight at the distant future. It's like finding a cryptic document from the 1500s that perfectly describes the mechanics of the Apollo moon landing.
That is a great way to think about it.
He starts by saying, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near.
He is seeing a reality that doesn't even exist yet. He prophesies a star coming from Jacob and a scepter rising from Israel.
Which are both classic, universal symbols of royal authority in the ancient Near East, according to the notes.
Right. But what he says this royal figure will do is incredibly specific. He says this leader will crush the forehead of Moab, which had to be terrifying for King Balak to hear and destroy the sons of Sheth.
I was diving into the background of these sons of Sheth in the study notes, and it turns out this isn't just mythical, poetic language.
No, it's very real.
Historically, the notes link them to the Shutu, a nomadic group living in the Transjordan region. What blew my mind is that they actually appear in ancient Egyptian execration texts dating all the way back to 1900 BC.
Which is a brilliant detail to highlight because it shows how deeply grounded this biblical text is in the actual geopolitical realities of the ancient world.
They weren't just campfire myths.
Exactly. They are preserving highly accurate historical data. The Shutu were real threats. Moab was a real kingdom. And the prophecy addresses them directly.
So who was the star and scepter historically?
Historically, the immediate fulfillment points to King David. Centuries after Balaam, David would become the Israelite king who subjugated Moab and Edom, which the text also refers to as Seir.
So for the ancient Israelites reading this, it provided very real historical political hope. It proved that God's promises actually materialized in their history.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, though, the study notes emphasize that the prophecy doesn't stop with King David.
Right, because it goes much further.
It does, and this brings up a vital concept in biblical literature:
Mm.
dual fulfillment. Prophecy often works in layers.
How so?
Think of it like looking at a mountain range from a distance.
Oh,
You might see two peaks that look like they are right next to each other, but in reality, there is a massive valley of time between them.
oh, I see.
The first peak was King David. But because later Israelite kings ultimately failed, leading to corruption, oppression, and exile, the prophecy took on a much larger ultimate meaning.
So it points forward again.
Right. The notes explain that we're looking at an eschatological prophecy, meaning a vision that ultimately concerns the final days of human history and the establishment of cosmic justice. Christians historically interpret the ultimate fulfillment of the star and scepter as pointing to Jesus, establishing the kingdom of God.
It goes from a local conflict over grazing land and borders to the establishment of David's kingdom, all the way to a cosmic resolution of human history. The lens just keeps zooming out,
It zooms way out.
and as it zooms out, Balaam rattles off these rapid-fire judgments against the surrounding nations. He looks at Amalek and calls them the first of the nations, but says their end is total destruction.
Because of their early unprovoked hostility toward Israel.
Right. And then he looks at the Kenites, who the notes tell us were nomadic metallurgists allied with Israel, and says their secure, rock-solid homes will eventually be consumed.
And then he mentions two names that have fascinated scholars for centuries: Ashur and Kittim.
The evolution of those names is incredible. I mean, I always assumed Ashur meant the massive Assyrian empire that later destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel.
It's a very common assumption. But the notes clarify that in this specific ancient context, Ashur likely refers to a relatively obscure nomadic group living in the northern Sinai or the Negev region, not the massive Iron Age empire.
Okay, that makes sense. But Kittim is where the historical layers really get interesting. The text says ships will come from the coast of Kittim and afflict Ashur, but then they too will perish.
Yeah, and Kittim originally referred to the island of Cyprus, right?
Right, originally. But what's fascinating is how the term evolves over centuries of biblical and extra-biblical literature.
It shifted over time.
It started as Cyprus, then became a generic term for the Sea Peoples or the Philistines coming from the Mediterranean.
And then it shifted again.
Yes. By the Hellenistic period, specifically in the texts we found in the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, Kittim had become a prominent prophetic code word. It was used by that community to describe the archenemies of God, first representing the Greek armies of Alexander the Great, and later representing the Roman legions.
It's almost like the prophecy lays down a structural template of human history. The names of the empires evolve from Cyprus to Greece to Rome, but the pattern of dominant, violent empires rising up only to eventually fall and perish remains exactly the same.
The divine momentum outlasts all of them.
Exactly.
But honestly, as deep and sweeping as all this history is, the thing that absolutely stopped me in my tracks reading these study notes wasn't the Greeks or the Romans or the Egyptian texts.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
It was the horrifying plot twist regarding what Balaam does after he finishes speaking.
Because the conclusion of chapter 24 is written so simply. Verse 25 just says, "Then Balaam got up and went back to his place. And Balak also went his way."
If you stop reading right there, it sounds like a peaceful, somewhat tense resolution. Everyone just packed up their tents and went home.
You read that and think, wow, Balaam stood his ground. He spoke the unvarnished truth.
He rejected a house full of silver and gold? What an incredible redemption story for a guy who started out as a spiritual gun for hire.
But both the Holman and NAA study notes drop a massive, devastating spoiler about the wider context of the book of Numbers.
Balaam didn't just go home and write a memoir about the time he saw the Star of Jacob.
No, his story takes a very dark, calculated turn.
The notes point us a few chapters forward to Numbers 31, specifically verse 16. It turns out Balaam went back to King Balak and advised him on a completely different strategy.
Since God wouldn't let Balaam curse the Israelites spiritually from the outside,
Balaam told Balak how to destroy them from the inside. He advised the king to use Midianite women to seduce the Israelite men into idolatry and sexual immorality.
he essentially handed Moab the exact blueprint to make the Israelites forfeit their own blessing.
He showed them how to bring a curse upon themselves, and the notes also highlight the grim end to this. Because of this profound betrayal, Balaam was eventually killed by the Israelites in battle in Numbers 31:8.
It's just a brutal ending.
So how do we even process this? This guy delivers one of the most beautiful, spirit-led, accurate prophecies in the entire ancient world. He sees the unstoppable power of God, and then he immediately goes into the back room and engineers their sabotage anyway.
It's unbelievable.
It's like a brilliant defense attorney giving a perfect, impassioned closing argument that completely acquits an innocent client, and then he steps out into the hallway, pulls the prosecution aside, and hands them the murder weapon.
It is a staggering contradiction. And this raises an important question, perhaps the most important question of this entire deep dive. We have to look at the massive chasm between having a revelation and experiencing a transformation.
But he had the revelation.
Right.
The text explicitly said his eyes were open.
His eyes were wide open. He saw God's truth with absolute clarity. He saw the reality of the blessing. He understood the futility of his omens, and he even articulated the cosmic future perfectly.
He had it all.
He possessed unparalleled intellectual and spiritual knowledge in that moment. But his heart, his inner character remained entirely corrupt. He still craved the wealth.
He still wanted the favor of the king.
He wanted the payout. Since he found that the spiritual armor of Israel couldn't be pierced by magic, his corrupt heart looked for a loophole. He targeted their moral underbelly. It is a profound tragedy that proves intellectual knowledge of the truth does not automatically equal ethical living.
That is a terrifying warning. It completely shatters the idea that if people just knew the truth, they would do the right thing. Balaam knew the absolute truth. He saw the source code of reality, and he still chose to walk directly into the dark.
He essentially tried to outsmart the very God he had just prophesied was unstoppable.
Which is the ultimate tragic irony of his life.
Absolutely. He foresaw the unstoppable, eternal kingdom of God. He saw the star and the scepter. Yet he deliberately chose to align himself with the doomed forces fighting against it.
It makes no sense.
He literally knew the end of the story, and he still chose to play for the losing side just to get a temporary reward. He is the ultimate example of someone who sees the light but prefers the darkness because it serves his immediate greed.
What an incredible, sobering journey through Numbers 24 today. We've explored the absolute futility of trying to commodify the divine. We've seen how ancient omens shatter when faced with raw, unvarnished revelation.
It covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We traced the deep historical roots of these texts, from nomadic tribes and ancient Egyptian records all the way to the code words of the Dead Sea Scrolls. But above all, we are left with the tragic, contradictory figure of Balaam.
It's a lot to take in.
It is a stark reminder that simply having access to great information or even experiencing moments of profound spiritual clarity is entirely meaningless if you don't allow that truth to transform your everyday actions.
It is a mirror held up to human nature. And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over as you step back into your day.
Let's hear it.
Think about that high vantage point Balaam had, looking down on the momentum of history. If someone were to view your life right now from a high vantage point with their eyes open to the raw truth, what unstoppable momentum would they see in you? And more importantly, are you working with the truth you know, or are you secretly fighting against it in the dark?
Wow. That is a question that requires some real honesty to answer. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We appreciate you taking the time to explore the depths and the warnings of these ancient texts with us. And as we close, we want to remind you that God blesses all the listeners. Take care, and we will see you on the next one.